Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today we're talking about episode 4 of Falcon and the Winter Soldier with myself, Matthew Fox, along with Paul Hoppy and Will Freeland. All that and more after a commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. I'm Matthew. As I said, I'm joined by two great guests. Start with Paul. Looking strong, Paul.
What? Oh, yeah, I've been lifting.
How you doing today?
I'm good. I actually have started exercising again after a hiatus, if you will. Feeling good. Yeah.
Nice. And Will was a great guest last time. We brought him back. How are you doing today?
Good, man. I appreciate you liking what I bring to the table and wanting me to come back. For sure. Well, and I gotta say, Will, at first I felt a little bad because we brought you in last week and said, look, we did this podcast. We're specifically talking about the ethical questions because so much of the Falcon and Winter Soldier episode 1 and 2 was just digging into all these questions about nationalism and patriotism and race and power and trauma and therapy. And then episode 3 was a ton of fun, but there wasn't much of that, to dive into. Well, ethics are back on the table, boys. We have a lot to go through.
Yeah, I'm ready, man.
So, what'd y'all think of this episode?
I will say my jaw dropped twice in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
One in shock and one in excitement.
Okay.
Because the Dora Milaje are amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That scene went pretty much exactly as I would have expected it to, and it was so good.
Oh man. There's a part of me every once in a while that feels bad for John Walker.
How's that part of you doing now?
He's right. So, but everyone, he's in over his head in so many situations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Poor military boy. It's just superhero dumb is just a whole other level.
Uh-huh.
And,
I mean, that line he had of, but
yeah.
they're not even super soldiers after
Oh
the
my
Dora
gosh.
Milaje kicked his ass.
Oh my gosh.
good.
So sad.
I know. He's like, there's very much the line of the schoolyard bully getting bullied.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just dude, you can see him struggling. You can see him trying. But you also see, he is very much a veteran of war. And
Right.
we don't need to see what he did in the war to know that he did some bad stuff.
Yeah.
He had to compromise a lot of his own morals to earn those medals.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, we'll get more into his character in a bit, but I definitely had some sympathy for him, too, in a way. Not in a, maybe he's the hero, but in he's not a mustache twirler. He's kind of becoming a very understandable antagonist, especially in that, he recognizes that he had to cut corners. He doesn't like what he did in Afghanistan. He seems to genuinely believe that he can do better now, but he's not very good at figuring that out.
Yeah.
Paul, what about you? What'd you think of this episode?
I kind of hated it.
Okay.
I thought I'd leave that for the big reveal. There were moments that I loved, including the aforementioned moment. If the series was longer, I'd probably quit. To be honest.
Interesting. Okay, because I'm so excited about it at the beginning.
I'm glad the last 2 episodes are not the same writer as these 2 middle episodes, as far as I understand. It's really felt like 2 very different series to me. The first 2 episodes I thought were very well-paced from what I want, but obviously a bit slow for some people. They felt very thoughtful and introspective, and I feel like in the 2 latest episodes, I feel like the characterization is uneven. I feel like the misunderstandings between Sam and Karli were super contrived. It feels to me like they're writing to connect set pieces, and some of those set pieces are awesome. Right. But I don't know, they should have just let the Dora kill Walker. Probably. I mean, I thought them getting involved and be oh, now we're gonna fight you. No, what? At least jump in the middle you're trying to like break up a fight, as opposed to then they just started fighting them. And I was like, what are you doing? I'm like, really? Are you really you're going to let Zemo get away? Like, you're going to let Zemo get away because the plot wants you to let Zemo get away. But like, they were there for him. Right? So like, them letting him get away, I mean, just collectively, but like,
that's sloppy Dora.
Yeah.
Protocol.
Like, I don't know. I just feel like that's just because that's what the plot wanted. And, I think the series is continuing to delve into very interesting questions. I feel like some of those questions are a little too big for a 6-episode action series. Mm-hmm. And like at the beginning of this series, I was like, I'm either going to love it or hate it. And I definitely both, know, like, and so it's just a very frustrating experience for me.
That's fair.
I agree. Yeah.
I think you're right about the contrivance of the Dora scene. Although the way they did it and the way the new Cap was so obnoxious. Like I could buy him being this episode certainly felt much less contrived than the last one. And in terms of the questions it's raising, I think I'm sort of torn because on the one hand, like, yes, I don't feel like we're going to get a full exploration of them, but I'm not sure I need to, because I do sometimes like a story where it's not saying like we're going to try and explore all these issues to their completion. We're just going to show you a story that's taking place in a world where these questions are taking place and kind of let people run with, like, we've talked about how this podcast started because you and I had totally different views of Civil War. Right. With me being Team Tony and you being Team Cap. And I
you
feel
were
like
Team Tony?
I am, yeah. I'll do an episode about that at some point.
Although I feel like the episode we did on that, you were sort of like, okay, so the actual details, fine, that's not really like the way it should be, but like the basic premise is...
But conceptually, fine. Yeah, okay, I mean, like, I'll give you conceptually some slight Team lowercase Tony.
My basic, Sokovia Accords are absolute garbage. I want the Avengers to have accountability. Right. I don't want them to have someone to have control over them. Yeah. But the point being, like, Civil War didn't answer those questions. It raised them and let people keep discussing them. And so I feel like I'm okay if the show does that, but you're right, there's still a lot. Like, I would be bummed if we don't go back to some of the issues raised in episode 1, that's for sure. But also, like, this episode was also just so much fun that I sort of had to kind of stop. Last episode, I felt like the contrivances were very clear. This time, I was more like, oh yeah, okay, I guess that kind of doesn't make sense, but dude, it's cool.
No, I absolutely agree, though. The first 2 episodes and these second 2 episodes are very different shows.
Yeah.
Like, it feels like the first half of a season and the second half of a season in a lot of, like, TV shows.
Oh, yeah, where they do, like, the 13-episode mini arcs or whatever, or 5,
right.
Yeah.
So it makes me real curious to see what 5 and 6 are going to be like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very curious too.
And it's funny. I mean, like I especially, but I think Paul and I both like have a huge amount of respect for the a lot of the Netflix MCU shows. But what you just brought up, Will, about the 13 episode arcs, like there's definitely some middle arcs in some of those seasons that go pretty far off the rails.
Yeah, some of them definitely could have been like 10 episodes. Some of them were 10 episodes. I think they made the second season of Iron Fist 10 episodes, and it's like, oh yeah, this is better than it would have been if it was 13 episodes. Yeah. Not that that's the reason it was better than the dumpster fire that got totally bucked up in season 1, but...
Man. Iron Fist.
Yeah. Daughters of the Dragon. Give us Daughters of the Dragon.
For sure.
Oh, they were so close. Man. Anyway. That's a whole other...
That is.
Thing.
Let's...
For sure.
I should have you guys on. We should all talk about the Netflix MCU. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's my favorite Marvel content, and like it's not even close. So I would love to talk about it.
I think it's my favorite MCU content. I think if we're doing favorite Marvel, Spider-Verse might be there, but yeah, definitely there's a lot to talk about with Netflix. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so let's actually talk about this Falcon episode, because as I said, there's a ton of ethics stuff that this went into. Let's maybe just kind of start with it felt like a big topic in this episode was killing people who don't necessarily need to be killed. Mm-hmm. And in terms, and I really loved the way they juxtaposed some of those things, because, at the end of the episode, Cap just straight up murders someone.
Yeah. Cold blood murder in broad daylight.
Cold blood murder in broad daylight. And I think it's portrayed in a way where the camera and the director are very clearly telling you Cap did something wrong.
Right.
Like, the blood dripping off the shield of Captain America has got to be one of the most searing and perfect images I've ever seen. At the same time, we're still getting Karli very much presented as a flawed, but like maybe we're supposed to be on her side character who also murdered people. In terms of the people she blew up in the building. Zemo.
Only 3.
Only 3.
Yeah, only 3.
Well, Cap only does 1. Zemo, murdered Nagel. And I like that, like, all the characters are talking about that, and we're bringing up that, like, Sam clearly wants to see Karli in a different light, and he has some reason to, but also Zemo's kind of calling him out on it. So what was your take on kind of how they addressed this whole issue?
Oh,
I was going to... Okay. So, I'm still salty about episode 3, where it just felt... I don't know. That's kind of what I mean about uneven characterization, where I think the idea of the leader of this movement just being like, yeah, I'm going to blow up this building full of people that we took captive without telling my team, like, I don't buy that. Okay. And I feel like if they just went in and shot people, like, that would have made more sense to me in a lot of ways. Right. But, like, if we just take that at face value, I do think, like, the context in which you kill people matters. Like, in general, I'm against killing people, right? But, like, if your goal is to overthrow an oppressive system, like an oppressive global system, I think it's much more understandable than if your goal is to support that global oppressive system, right? I mean, John Walker is a supremacist, right? And Zemo claims that anybody who takes a Super Soldier Serum is a supremacist. I don't buy that. We can get into that. But I do think, like, we got some insight into what was going on during the blip, right? In terms of, like, I'm like, oh yeah, that actually does sound like a better world. Now, granted, that's from one character's perspective in terms of how they're portraying it. But, like, the idea that now apparently borders weren't really a thing, and countries were just like, yeah, you can come in, like, we need workers. Like, we're not trying to exclude people. I mean, I see nationalism as an inherently racist, supremacist institution. Like, I don't believe in the concept of nations. I don't believe in the concept of borders. And I think if you were to, let's go out on a limb here, say you had an Infinity Gauntlet and you just were like, I am going to snap every officer of ICE out of existence. Like, I would be okay with that. Like, and that might sound ridiculous, but, like, you could, I mean, I think it would be better if you were like, okay, here's my demands. You're going to abolish this agency that is doing evil in the world. And if you don't, they're going to cease to exist. And, like, yeah, you could probably use the Mind Stone or something. And, like, so if you have that much power, like, you can avoid a lot of these solutions, right? But, like, in the real world, or even in the MCU, if all you are is, like, a super soldier, which, I just think should be, like, considered a performance enhancer, really. But, then you don't necessarily have as many, you don't have the luxury of as many methods. So I don't think it's the same thing. I do think, like, do her ends justify her means? I think probably not, because I don't think her means were going to actually achieve her ends. But if they were, sure, yeah, you want to kill 3 people to abolish, like, international oppression? Yeah, go for it. Like, and, like, we'll hold a trial and you'll be guilty of murder, and, like, if we still have prisons, you'll go to one. But, like, we won't have borders anymore, and so a lot of people won't die who do die right now because we do.
Right.
And rant.
Yeah, I think that is very interesting. I mean, killing in the name of getting your killing in the name of achieving a goal is I don't know. That's tough. I mean, I would prefer Sam's approach of, even when your goals are different, you still can find a common ground to get to our like hopefully to our goal. But an individual person can change, but it's been proven so many times that people won't change.
That's a good point.
Or can't change.
Mm-hmm.
Institutions, yeah.
And so, you can have every single individual conversation ever, but you get in a room around a table of 25 different points of view, and I don't think there's going to be a net gain of positivity.
Right. Yeah, I think it's what I like so much is how much it raises these things in complicated ways, because I think there are ways in which I think you're right that Karli's means are a lot more admirable in a lot of ways.
Ends.
And I think I agree with a lot of the things she's fighting for in terms of one world, one people, and I share a lot of your same feelings about borders and things like that. I think I struggle though with, to me, one of the things is that, and this is kind of just my whole thing about people with superheroes in general, is that who gets to decide that my goals are so worthy that I get to kill people?
Right.
Because to me, like, what does Karli do? She blows up a building because she's trying to stop something that she sees as oppressing the world.
Mm-hmm.
What does Zemo do? Zemo blows up a building because he's trying to stop people from doing something that he thinks is destroying the world. I mean, what he does in Civil War in terms of blowing up the UN building. Like, I think we're much more sympathetic to her cause than to his.
Oh, I think his is a little defensible, actually.
Yeah, well, that's why I said more. I mean, I think there is some truth to his cause as well. But that's my point. Is I feel like I don't think that connection between the two of them is coincidental. Like, nor the connection between her and Cap in this episode. I think part of what this is showing is trying to create simple rules of, like, you never do this for the cause. It just doesn't work. Like, we have to look at all the nuances and complexities. Because I don't know yet where I stand on Karli, but I'm very conflicted. And one of the things that I was looking at, especially in this episode, is, and this is to me the one pushback I have about why I think maybe what Karli does makes sense, that I didn't think we had in episode 3, that I think we have now. She explains why she felt like she needed to do it, and it seems like it's working. Like, what she said was that she needed to, make the bold statement, and she had 2 goals. One was to get more people to support her, which is happening, but also she kind of wanted to it's a thing actually that a lot of, like, revolutionary groups will do. Like, they want to push the oppressor to bring the oppression much more out into the open.
Right.
They want
which seems to have worked.
Yeah, they want the GRC to go and look, like, in part because of what Karli started, Captain America is now on film murdering a guy with the shield.
Yeah.
Like,
who's now
and again,
a
I don't
martyr
know if that justifies it, but
basically.
Like, I think others might be like, yeah, Karli might look at it and be like, I hate that I had to kill those people, but now more people are on our side.
Yeah, that's like the Magneto quote, the only good thing to come from X-Men 3. Says, my single greatest regret is that Charles had to die for our cause to become real, or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it was interesting in the framing there. So when they're listening to the newscast, and that's where we find out that, 11 people injured, 3 people died. They first, on the news segment, they first talk about the negative impacts and that how much harder the GRC is going to push to security and try to fight the Flag Smashers, and it shows everybody's reaction to that. Karli gets up and starts to walk away, and that's when they throw in the part of the news segment that, like, but it also has a lot more followers now, but, like, it felt like such an afterthought, even from the frame of a news. And so, like, did people even listen to that? Why didn't Karli, like, claim that and be like, look, we are working?
Right. That wasn't the lead. That was, like, kind of buried.
But, I mean, that's news for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I listened to an episode of hype is my superpower, and I forget whether it was the most recent episode, I think, where Steve tells a story about like this protest.
Yeah.
And how the takeaway from the protest, like on the news, was like that it held up traffic and there was a pregnant woman who had
to pee.
Yeah. Like that was the takeaway from the thing.
Yeah. I mean, oh man, that was heartbreaking. I felt so bad for that.
I know. And of course that the delay was like mostly caused by the cops like escalating. Yep. Totally ridiculous.
I mean, I live here in Minneapolis, and when all the stuff was happening last summer, like we had that kind of thing all the time. You know, the number of times where like I would be watching friends of mine who were live casting from the protests they were at, and then watching the news where like the story of it was completely different.
Yeah.
And I am very, I mean, to bring this back to this, but I think it's very relevant. It looks like people have just filmed Captain America with blood dripping down his shield.
Right. Yeah.
It looks like that's like, okay, game over. Like
that
he's getting
should
canceled.
be the lead, but
but can we also point out
the media...
that Flag Smashers don't have a uniform? Yeah. It looks like he just killed a civilian in broad daylight.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the way, like, I think it'll be very interesting to say the way the media in the MCU spins that interest, because I mean, like, you know, Battlestar did get killed, and I want to do a quick aside, by the way, that I have a small issue here of, in this world, when a super soldier punches a civilian against a pillar, he dies. How many times did Steve Rogers, in the most noble way, punch cops against pillars? But Paul and I have had this rant before about how, like, people own, like, you know, Daredevil can hit people in the head with metal rods, but it's never a mortal wound unless the plot wants it to be.
Right.
But so
the only counter to that is if you wanted to make the argument, it shows how much restraint a super soldier has to learn to have when fighting non-powered people.
And then I think is an interesting point, because then it does get into, like, Karli is still fairly new to being a super soldier.
Exactly. She let her emotions take over.
Well, but so in that case, if that's okay, John Walker is even newer to being a super soldier.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So does he get let off the hook some?
But John Walker using oh gosh, there's too much to talk about.
I know. So good.
The parallels in positioning of John Walker and the Flag Smasher, I forget his name, and Steve and Tony at the end of Civil War. They both had the man pinned. They both used their shield, and Steve showed restraint.
Yeah.
John Walker did not.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that was a very intentional moment of showing again how, like, we're bouncing around here, but I think it's so relevant. To me, when Zemo was making his point about how all super soldiers are going to become, it's basically a version of like power corrupts, you know, that you can't be. He's sort of saying kind of like the Magneto thing of like someone who is basically a superior form of human. Of course, they're going to see things in supremacist ways. And I love that Zemo, when someone brings up Steve Rogers, is just like, oh, touche. I'll acknowledge that that's an example. That
he just accepts it. He's like, that's true. However, this is not Steve.
Right. He's like, that's an exception. It, you know, the expression like the exception that proves the rule always drives me nuts. I'm like, that's not how rules work. But but I think that's kind of like what he was. You know, he was like, yeah, okay. He also had a great line. I mean, like, I just want to say, like, Zemo was still really entertaining. Like, the Turkish Delight thing was great. And in terms of justifying him bombing the UN summit, like, he did successfully get vengeance for Njobu, right? I mean, like, it's not like T'Chaka hadn't, like, done some bad things. So, but, which Killmonger, I guess, didn't really get vengeance. But anyway, what? Yeah, he had another great line where, like, John Walker, like, said something that he disagreed with. He's like, no. But I understand. Like, he was, I forget the exact line, but he was basically like, I understand where you're coming from. But no.
Yeah, I continue to find Zemo to be one of the most interesting. I mean, I think he's just an incredibly charming, charismatic character. I think he's an incredibly attractive character. But also, I feel like he's kind of just like the person who, he's so cynical, but in a way where I feel like he really respects the different moral positions of the people who are there, even if he's like, he's kind of pointing out the way that so many of them are too idealistic, you know? And I feel like he's very much wanting to be much more cynical about everything.
Yeah. Although saying that taking the Super Soldier Serum makes you a supremacist, I think is its own sort of idealistic view of like what it means to be human and whatever. But also when when he's saying that, and when he's like, would you take the serum or whatever, like, I don't know, I feel like that's awful rich coming from a baron.
Yes.
You know?
Right, he already has power.
Exactly.
Yeah, he has all this privilege that others won't have.
Exactly. And he's like, oh, but you're taking it. You know, it's actually very reminiscent of Tony and Cap, the real Captain America, or the first real Captain America. Maybe we'll get a second. But in the first Avengers movie, you know, where Tony's like, everything special about you came out of a tube. And he's like, well, you're just a suit of armor. What do you have besides that? And he's like, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, you know, I know guys with none of that who are worth 10 of you. Like, you know, where it's kind of like this guy from Brooklyn who like got given this power, right? Versus someone who was like born with this power. Mm-hmm. And the guy who was born with it looking down on the person who like used, you know, PEDs.
Yeah, like there's some episode of Batman, I think it was in the animated series, I'm not sure. I remember reading an article about it a year or two ago, but where basically like he's or maybe in one of the movies, but basically like he's coming up against someone who has like very little sort of social or economic or any kind of power, and does one of the kind of like the DC universe, there's 8 million ways to get power, whatever it is, but he does one of those things. And Bruce is kind of like calling him out, like, why would you do that? And I remember watching that. The response is like, but Bruce, look up, you don't need Super Soldier Serum or animal DNA or whatever because you're rich. You, like, as he says in the Justice League movie, you know, that is his superpower.
It's not his superpower. Oh my god, it bothers me so much.
I know, but his Bruce Wayne's economic and social power and privilege allow him to do a lot of the things that many other people couldn't do.
That is true.
It is not his superpower. We're also not going to make this the Zack Snyder discussion that we all wanted to
just be. Don't get me started.
Well, let me just go on this Super Soldier question a little further. And Will, you asked a great question in chat, so I'll just put it to the two of you. Would you take the Super Soldier Serum if you could?
So it sucks because there's oh man, do you guys ever watch After Hours, the Cracked series from like years ago?
No, I saw the Scorsese movie, but I haven't seen the show.
No. So they bring up these kinds of questions a lot, and the two frames of thought are always, okay, am I myself in my life with this situation, or am I in a world where this is commonplace? So from the frame of reference of superheroes and being in a Marvel world, I don't think I would do it. I personally have a superhero complex. I try to help everyone that I can, but in a world where doing that is going to put very powerful antagonists, me and my family, in very powerful antagonist sights. I don't know if my superhero complex would necessarily come to fruition in that world.
Interesting.
I would be less than a street level hero. Like, I'd be more inclined to take a serum that might give me bulletproof skin and do that. Do the Luke Cage thing, but I don't think I would do Super Soldier Serum. Now, my life in this world, regular Will Freeland, banker by day, nerd 24/7. I think I would, because one, I want to be in shape, but two, I like to help people move, and being able to lift a couch by myself, so I don't need to wait for someone else to show up. Awesome. I just think of it from the perspective of, what do I do in my life that I would benefit from having super strength? And there are a few things, not the least of which is helping people move. It's the whole reason why I want to own a truck instead of the Mazda 3 that I have. Like, that from that frame of reference, I would take a Super Soldier Serum.
What about you, Paul?
First of all, I wanted to say I know about Will's penchant for helping people move from listening to Hype is My Superpower. People should listen to Hype is My Superpower.
Great podcast.
I would want some medical data on potential side effects, safety, efficacy, etc. Preferably a peer review study or 3. But I think calling it Super Soldier Serum is like a little like
pejorative.
Yeah, well, no, I mean it's just very narrow focus. You know, it's the thing.
It implies the use.
Yeah, exactly.
It says, okay, well, you're going to be a soldier now.
Right. It's like, here's a thing that will make you physically better than you are now. Right? It will put you in peak physical condition. It might make you live longer, although maybe you need to get frozen for that. Unclear. You know, and like, yeah, of course. Like, what? Like, that's, what, I had a thing I wanted to read that I wrote before. But like, no, I don't know where I put it. But, you know, the point just being like, yeah, I would like to be in peak physical condition. And, you know, like, I don't think taking a serum, if it didn't have a bunch of negative side effects, like, if it had negative side effects, like it was rage-inducing, right? And, like, it would make you, like, a shitty person who was in great physical condition. Like, no, pass. No thanks.
Hard
you
pass.
Know? But if, like, I were still me, but just be, like, a physically improved version of me, like, yeah. And the show is clearly framing that as an ethical question, which, like, I don't think it is. Like, you know, I think it's worth discussing, and I think it's interesting to think about. You know, and I mean, I hadn't even considered Will's point of, like, you know, if you take it and then you, like, become a target, and that puts, like, your family in danger, you know, like, yeah, that's something to think about. That's maybe more of an ethical consideration than, like, just, like, you know, would I take something that made me physically better than I am now? You know, the idea that then you'd be superior to other humans, it's like, whatever, man. Like, I mean, I think there are some ways that I'm, like, better than most people, and I think there's some ways that I'm not better than most people, and, like, I don't think that makes me better than people or worse than people, like, in a value sense, right? It's like being good at a thing, like punching or whatever. It's like, yeah, that means you're better at punching. It doesn't mean anything else, you know? So, like, taking Super Soldier Serum, it's like, yeah, you know, like, okay, I can be a physically better version of who I am. Cool, let's do it. That's why I'm exercising again.
I think for me, there's a couple different things I would say there. And I would just say from the beginning, I would very much not take the Super Soldier Serum, and I'll explain why. But I think the points you both are making are really help to kind of frame all this, and it's why I think it's such a great question. I think for me, like, Will, what you said about how, like, you have kind of a superhero thing, I definitely have that as well. Like, I used to say that, like, I'm someone who's fighting very hard not to be a Gryffindor. Because what I mean by that is I feel like, and granted, I think this is true even more so for, like, a person with a lot of privilege, like, someone who wants, I'm not saying this about you, Will, by any means, I'm just saying, like, this is a general thing. I think a person who feels like they very much want to help people, and they have a lot of power and privilege and ability to help people, can do wonderful things. They can often also do an awful lot of harm.
Absolutely.
You know, in the attitude of, like, you know, I want to help people. I am a hammer. I am going to look for a nail that I can help someone nail down. A lot of things start looking like nails, you know? And, like,
yes.
To me, the metaphor I often think of is, like, you know, like the, you know, on the individual level, like the person who, like, sees people arguing and, like, busts in before they don't really fully understand what's going on and makes things worse, all the way up to, like, you know, a nation whose foreign policy is all about, like, we want to help, we want to sponsor democracy, we want to, and of course it's, like, because it's super corrupted, but even when it's not, there's still an element of, like, you're trying to help and you're just making things worse. Like, look at the Peace Corps, you know, I mean, we now have all these studies about how the Peace Corps actually did, like, a lot more harm in some cases, motivated entirely by Americans and other people thinking, like, we've got all this power and privilege, let's do something to help. And I love, Paul, that you brought up the Turkish delight thing, because I think Have either of you read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? Or do you know much about those books?
I've only seen the movie.
Okay. I'm about the same.
I read them when I was very young, but I've read a lot about them because they're like very big and, there's a lot of theology in them. And to me, the Turkish delight it's very much a part of the story as an element of temptation.
Right.
And I think it's very intentional that's a part of it here. And that to me, the way in which I think it becomes an ethical issue for most people, maybe not all, maybe not the Steve Rogers of the world, or the even broader, is that once you are not, I feel like saying it's in peak physical condition is understating it a little bit. You are now in a state of physical condition wildly off the charts for the human range,
Yeah, preternatural.
If humans are like a 9 to 15, you're now like a strength 25.
9 to 15? What a weird range. Sorry, let's not get hung up on that. I just wanted to, 9 to 15.
I was trying to go on the D&D scale of where below 9 is very below 7 is fairly
Okay, yeah. 15's exceptional, but you got a 21, you're yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, moving beyond my odd example.
You're like Drizzt or something if you're in a 20
I think the problem is that it now invites a huge temptation. Especially in remember this is the MCU world where we haven't heard I think Tom Holland has said these words, but certainly they're part of the Spider-Man idea. The whole concept of with great power comes great responsibility.
He hasn't said it
I
yet.
think for myself, I would feel that. I would start feeling anytime there was something happening around me that as a super person I could stop, but I didn't, then it's somewhat my fault. And I already do kind of feel that way in some ways, but to me, I think that's where it is. It's the question of what is the temptation that it would offer you? And maybe not everyone would feel that, but I know for me, that's why I definitely couldn't take it. Because I just wouldn't trust myself.
Right. That's very true.
That's fair.
I'd get hurt.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. It's I don't know how to throw a punch. I now have superhuman strength, and it'd probably break my thumb,
Right. So
you'd
much
probably
other
break
stuff
your
has
pinky,
to,
actually. But
so much other stuff has to come with super strength. That's my problem with super speed. Is so many other things have to come with the package of being able to run really fast.
Right.
I mean, if you can't,
it's more
faster.
than just that one speed. Yeah, if you can't react fast, if you can't see fast, if you if your bones aren't strong enough to handle the quick twitch, there's so much that nobody talks about. It's so frustrating.
Anyway.
Apparently, if you're Quicksilver, you also have to have a Walkman that can play something at such a fast speed that the music sounds normal to you. Sorry, that's one little bone of contention.
Or a bulletproof vest.
Yeah. But so now using that, let's talk about what the characters do with it. What do you all think of Paul? I've heard your thoughts, but Will, especially from you, what's your take on kind of Zemo's whole idea of where people come from with superpowers and this idea of the supremacy and why he thinks no one should take it?
I'm not. I see what he's saying. I'm not huge on it. I guess I guess his perspective is more those who seek power shouldn't have it. Not necessarily that everyone who is powered shouldn't have it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you think of someone so Tony, should he have a suit of armor or should he not? Should he have made one and continually tried to be better? His origins is he built it so he could escape captivity, but then he kept on going with it and he ran amok with it.
Right.
At what point should he no longer have a suit of armor, if at all? If that's even I would like to sit down with Zemo and ask him about all of the individuals. How does he feel about the fact that Sam has a flight suit that is bulletproof and all this other stuff that he got from being in the military? He earned his way to it, as opposed to I want to go and get that. So, I guess my opinion of Zemo's stance would depend on how he felt about those that came across power or those that naturally had power.
Like the Luke Cages or the Jessica Jones, the ones who didn't choose this.
Yeah. Like, how does he feel about Iron Fist?
Yeah, Iron Fist is like the one out of those four, right? Who was like, I want that power.
Yeah. He sought the Iron Fist.
Daredevil being the other ones.
And I think that framework that you're talking about also makes Steve Rogers brought into even more contrast because, like, I think we were talking about there's a great line in here about how power just makes, I think it's said by Battlestar, Lamar, but it's something along the lines of, like, power just makes you more of who you are.
Yes.
And Steve was not someone who'd ever had power. You know, Steve was not someone who had learned to use power to control people. He was someone who'd always been the victim of bullying. And so when he gets power, for him, it's all about stopping the bullying.
Yeah.
John Walker, I think, is pretty clearly a bully. Like, he's a bully who has some good motivations and is sympathetic in some ways. But he's, you know, it's that classic bully thing of, like, he expects to be able to win the fight and he can't comprehend it when he doesn't win the fight. And so he wants more power.
Well, he puts so much power in the shield. He puts so much emphasis on what the shield should be and what it should do to other people before he even has to throw a punch.
Yeah. And I think kind of that's why Zemo says that Steve is the exception. Because, you know, I don't know if you know Steve's history, or maybe everyone does because of the legend of it, but just the idea of Steve came from such a different place of wanting getting the serum compared to everybody else.
Well, he didn't seek the serum.
Right.
He was chosen because he tried to enlist 4 times in a row.
Right.
Yeah, it was this 95-pound dude who was like, I want to go, you know, fight bullies.
Yeah. He's the heart of what America was looking for. It just, America doesn't naturally produce that kind of heart.
Right.
Right.
I do also think... Oh, go ahead, Paul.
Oh, I'll just remove this from, this was one of my bullet points, Lamar Hoskins quote, I think it just makes you more of what you are, which I very much believe, like, that's how I view power, you know, like, and what is the Super Soldier Serum if not, you know, power, you know, like, people always say power corrupts, but I never really bought that. Like, I think power reveals, and, you know, I feel like I do feel like people become, you have an opportunity to kind of express more of who you are because it's like a multiplier kind of, right? And so, you know, it exposes Steve Rogers as who he always was, but now he has the power to, instead of grab a trash can lid and be like, I can do this all day, and like, yeah, you're going to get your butt kicked, Steve, to like actually be able to stop bullies, right? Whereas, you know, John Walker is revealed to be a murderous turd. And, you know,
in the name of flag and stars and stripes.
Yes, exactly. In the name of America. I like just a couple notes on that. Like there was a moment where, like, as soon as they introduced Battlestar, or you know, originally just as Lamar, like, I was like, how long is this guy going to survive in this show? Like, it's like, of course they like killed the black guy who's not the lead. Like, just like, of course, you know, and like, like, on the one hand, like, just like enough of that, right? But at the same time, I think there is something interesting in terms of, like, John Walker's apparent, like, going off the deep end is the result of his black friend dying. But he still spent his life fighting to uphold, you know, the racist systems of American imperialism. Yeah. And that's what he's doing now. And I think it's sort of a little bit of a kind of a, I don't know, a light on the sort of like, oh, but I have a black friend, as like, therefore I can't be racist, you know, but it's like, but you can, you know, you still have to think about things and like, look at yourself. I don't know. Oh, and finally, like, I see people using the word execution in that scene at the end. That's a murder. The word is murder. You know, like, not that it's not an execution, but an execution is a murder. And that's also, like, it's not like he has, like, full state authority necessarily. Like, when he says, to the Dora, like, you know, you don't have jurisdiction here. It's like, what? And you do? Like, what? You're in Latvia, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what's going on? But yeah, I don't know. I just that when people use words that get away from what, like, really what happened, right? Yeah. Like,
self-defense.
He murdered someone who was at that point defenseless.
Like to me, like what Karli did to the people in the building was murder. What Karli did to Lamar was in a fight. And to me, that's a fundamentally different
that's
thing.
manslaughter. It's the difference between murder and manslaughter. And the bomb thing is like probably murder 2, but it's mass murder 2. Whereas this is just murder 1. Or maybe it's murder 2. Whatever. Anyway, but it's murder. It's not manslaughter.
It's not an execution either.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's there's no trial. He's just like, I'm going to kill this guy now because I want to.
Right. Oh my gosh. Sorry. Go ahead. The fact that they showed him afterwards not regretting his actions was huge.
Oh yeah.
Like
he looks like vindicated, right?
Yeah,
he's like,
breathing
I
hard,
killed him.
Looking at his work.
Yeah. Right.
That was huge. Yeah. I thought he was going to be like, holy shit, what have I done? But no.
Right.
Yeah.
Nope.
I know Paul did not like the show and stopped watching, but Will, have you watched The Boys?
Yeah.
Did you get a very strong Homelander vibe there? Where, like, especially in the stories where Homelander is just like, he's done the most brutal things, but he's utterly convinced he did it for the right reasons, and then he's just baffled why the people watching don't agree.
I see what you're saying, but I think Homelander is an extreme of
definitely
what Walker's doing. But I can see the parallels.
Yeah. And Paul, going back to what you were saying, especially about the thing about Lamar dying, I had so many mixed feelings about that, and I had some of the same predictions when we first met him. And there was mentioned comments that were posted in the MCU chat about, like, could we describe Lamar as having been fridged? And I think the term fridging is something that specifically should be regarded in terms of gender terms. I don't know if there's an equivalent term here. But I do think there's something really fucked up about it being like the black sidekick is the one who has to die. I think that the show is trying to be very intentional about that. I don't know if that makes it better or not, but one thing that a couple writers I saw pointed out that I thought was so powerful was, the one hand, they're showing Walker as having like the black the spouses of color, the black best friend. He went to an HCBU, a historically black college or university. Like, he's so connected in that world. And then in the last episode, when he wanted to get Sam's attention, right after Sam has dealt with, like, harassing police, he does it by turning on a police siren.
Yeah.
Like, he has no concept of why that would be, like, a immediate trauma trigger kind of horrible situation for someone like Sam. Yeah. And to me, that just really got into, like, just the utter ignorance, like, the lack of empathy there of, like, what that situation would be like for someone who doesn't look like Walker.
Mm-hmm. So, I will say, killing Lamar, I don't see it as killing the black character, only because I think they wanted to kill the sidekick.
Yeah.
And Battlestar is a black character in the comics. Like, it's two different facts. I don't think they're blended together to make a statement or anything.
That makes sense.
In terms of, like, fridging or whatever, if you want to reserve that term but find an equivalent, I think it is, for me, it falls under the category of character death that happens to create an impact on another character.
Right.
Like where that's the purpose of the character death. Right. Yes, exactly. He got jossed, really. That's like Whedon's always like killing someone off to like, well, but Coulson, that's perfect. That's exactly the one, right? Like Quicksilver wasn't killed off like to create, so that then we'd get WandaVision like 9 years later or whatever. Like, right. Maybe it wasn't 9 years, but Coulson was like to bring the team together, right? And I don't know. It's like I want characters to have an arc that is affected by what happens around them.
Right.
but like I don't want this feeling like they were like, okay, we need to get from point A to point B. All right, how are we going to do that? Oh, we'll kill off this character. And the fact that it also was one of these, oh, suddenly comic book violence is fatal moments, you know?
Yeah.
Which I do think, like, Karli not being experienced enough to know how to hold back is, like, brilliant headcanon.
Right.
But like,
that's not how they're gonna use it.
Right, exactly.
She's gonna own her actions and be like, that's the reality of what we have to do.
Right. Yeah.
And that sucks. I really, oh man, like, if they pulled more from the nuanced writing of the first 2 episodes and gave this like an 8-episode arc, I think they could have done that. Like, Karli killing in episode 3 felt very much like Dany's raid in season 8 on Game of Thrones. Like, you don't see her turn on screen, and that's why it's so off-putting. And her kill, like, they did what they could, I feel like, when she just ran into the room. She lets out a very loud scream. Like, she's clearly emotional and not in control. And the only other thing they could have done is, like, give an audio cue that his ribs cracked or broke when she punched him. But like, but and the weight of the scene afterwards, when we see literally all of the fighting stop to go and sort of mourn Lamar's death, that would have been the time for Karli to be like, I need to control my powers. I need to. I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry. Like, any of that, but they're not going to, because she's now, over the last episode and a half, she's been casted as this person that is willing to do anything to get her goal.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, I'm trying to remember, I saw Civil War pretty recently, and I think my memory is that when Steve and Bucky are fighting the Berlin cops, because the cops are coming to get them, that Steve at one point kind of says to Bucky to, like, pull your punches a little bit. Like, he's kind of like...
Yes.
And so, okay, so I think that's a nice reminder of, like, that Steve knows how to kind of, like, only punch at, like, what it, 40% or 70% or whatever it is, to be able to, like, get the Berlin cops out of their way without necessarily, like, killing every human being who is the super soldier who he punches. Right. And that Bucky has trouble with that, and Bucky has to, like, be reminded of that.
Bucky doesn't have control of his emotions. So that would also further get into this idea that maybe Karli didn't know how to do that yet, or was so in the heat of the moment that she didn't think to do it. But you're right. I feel like we need more time to delve into that. Which, like, it kind of, to pull from all of the canon that Steve's been in, he's always calm when he's fighting. Yeah. Like, it shows kind of, and again, this is more headcanon because it's not openly talked about, but, like, he has to keep his cool. He has learned that he has to keep his cool. And he clearly goes out of his way to make sure that his head is always in the game. Heads up, eyes sharp, whatever he says. But he's always keeps his cool. The only 2 times that it looks like he's let himself go is when he's trying to hold back Thanos in Infinity War, and when he's about to smash Tony. He's like, in that last fight in Civil War, he's losing more and more control because he just watched Bucky get his arm shot off. and at the very final moments when it counted, he pulled himself back.
Yeah.
And so
I think
it would be
the connection
great.
You made.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I fully accept that it's headcanon, but, like, that's basically that's what it is. That's what's happening. Yeah. That's what we see happen.
No, I think I agree with you, and I think that's kind of, you pointed out at the beginning that the similarity of the shot between Cap almost hitting Tony with his shield and then John Walker doing that, I think is very intentional, because exactly that. It's that in that moment, Cap could stop himself, because in both cases, their best friend / sidekick has been either killed or has been almost killed,
Yeah.
So I think that's a great connection. if I can jump to a different topic for a bit, this is partially just a fun connection, but also I think there's kind of an interesting question to explore here. You talked about Bucky getting his arm shut off. I loved so much the Dora Milaje being able to just like push a button and have Bucky's arm fall off.
And Sam's just like, did you know that you could do that? No.
And Will, I don't know if you're a DC fan, but to Paul especially, and Will, if you also are, I got a strong Amanda Waller vibe in that moment. In that, like, or even like Batman, that element of like, any hero that's out there, you're always going to have a plan ready in case that person has to be taken down. And the idea that they would have like built into this Wakandan vibranium arm they gave him the ability that only they knew to disarm him, literally. If they had to. It just to me felt like such not Suicide Squad movie, like put a bomb in their head, but like the DC Universe comics, Amanda Waller who always has a plan for everybody. Did you kind of get a similar feel there?
How defeated he was. The look on his face of just like, why? Oh my god!
I kind of wish I wish Tony was there because there would be so many jokes about like you can't
need a hand
function the way you want it to. But yeah, what do you think of is there an Amanda Waller connection there?
I'm more of a kind of Batman vibe for me, but
yeah, that's fair.
But I mean they're on a similar wavelength with different kind of goals to an extent, just in terms of, but like because. Amanda Waller would just have a bomb in his head and it would blow up.
Yeah,
Batman would be like, I'm going to disable the suit, and you're going to have to stop using it.
Yeah.
Like, are you done now? Little white wolf cub.
Oh my gosh. That was amazing.
It was so good. Especially because there's been a lot of talk online about how, like, the whole white wolf idea, and, like, some people have been putting out this idea that, like, Bucky could become the next Black Panther or even the next King of Wakanda. And I just kind of loved that, like, yes, they have a respect for him, but also they can, like, just completely, unhinge him.
They'll keep him in check.
Yeah.
So another thing I thought had a lot to be discussed was, at one point they talk about the idea of Karli becoming Captain America. And they're talking about, like, how, like, Steve Rogers was so good and pure. And she says, one of my favorite lines, today's heroes don't have their luxury of keeping their hands clean. What'd you all think of that and the kind of argument she's making there?
That's some Punisher shit.
Yeah. Like, I don't... But people are always saying, oh, the world's more complicated now. Like, you can't... What worked before doesn't work now. Like, I don't know. I just never buy it. Like, yeah, some things, okay, there weren't, like, nuclear weapons in, like, the 19 teens or early 40s. Like, there are things that are different in the world. But, like, the idea that things, like, weren't really complicated before, too,
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like statements like that often are, like, a misunderstanding of the past.
Yeah.
And
I think... I think in this show it was very intentional because the first thing I thought of is we keep talking about how Cap was like fighting in this morally simpler time and like he kept his hands clean. Cap was fighting for the army that was doing what it did to Isaiah and other black super soldiers, And I think to me it's very intentional that we keep referencing Cap as this model of the perfect Captain America while also bringing up all the terrible things that the country Cap was fighting for was doing at the time, So I definitely got the same impression you did, Paul. And I think that's the writers being somewhat intentional of like this idea that people could keep their hands clean was kind of a myth.
Right.
Absolutely. It's not realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. At the same time, like I think it's also unreasonable to think there's no like. That, like, there's only one way of going about things,
right.
Like, when the scene between Sam and Karli was one of my favorite scenes, which is one of the reasons that I hated the episode so much, because it kept getting interrupted by, like, Captain Doofus. Yeah, and like, when he goes in his Falcon outfit, it's like, that they can track you, right? Like, and I actually didn't even know what was going on. Like, were they in a different building and then they went to a different building? I found that all, like, very confusing. But, to get back to the point, like, the conversation between them was great and I thought mirrored a lot of, conversations or arguments or discussions that people have about, how to move forward with different causes, where Sam's like, look, I get what you're trying to do, and like, I want to do that too, but I don't like how you're going about doing it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's just a very common thing. It's like, personally, I don't go around and like free animals from confinement, but like some people do, and they're called terrorists, and like, actually, I'm fine with this. Is a bad example. I think what they do is fine. But like, there could be more extreme examples. But the point is, like,
if they killed a security guard at an animal factory as part of that, that would be where you're like, I'm not wild that they killed the security guard, but I'm glad the animals were freed. Is that maybe a better example?
Or like if you just went and like, murdered a bunch of like factory farmers, like the point to me would be like, look, I see the goal you're going for, which isn't like for those people to be dead. It's to dismantle this system. I don't think the way you're going about doing this is going to work. And like, that's actually maybe a larger reason that I wouldn't even think about doing anything like that than like the sort of moral quandary. I mean, a lot of groups that are regarded as terrorists, like, are in their own eyes like freedom fighters, right? Oh, yeah. They're almost always like a group of people who are trying to end what they view as oppression, and maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. A lot of the we can look at the means and be like, well, those are horrible ways to go about that, and some of them it's like, like white supremacist terrorism, like, well, that's just that. I mean, that's just a horrible end and a horrible means.
Right.
But like, it a lot of things, I think it does come down to like, what are you trying to do? But then recognizing there's different ways of going about that. And like, if something can be done through nonviolence or, without violence, that's always going to be my first choice. Like, that's my goal for like where the world ends up, is like to have a nonviolent world. And I'm skeptical about whether or not you can achieve that through violence. But like, at the same time, I understand that sometimes throughout history, like, like slavery was ended through a war, right? Mm-hmm. Like,
yeah,
sometimes it's violence that does. Violence has a tendency to change things, but whether it changes them, like enough or irrevocably or in a way that we actually end up with a world that we're really happy with, I don't know.
Right.
I feel like every time I talk about killing a lot of people, nobody really wants to say anything after a while.
I can speak a lot on this, but I wanted to let Will jump in if you wanted to.
Oh, no. Keep going.
Okay. I think there's a couple really interesting things you're saying there, Paul. One is, it's funny because this conversation also came up a bit on the MCU cast, and someone else brought up this example, which is what I was thinking of. I'm currently reading a biography of Nelson Mandela, and like, I grew up at a time when Nelson Mandela was held up as like the epitome of nonviolent protest, and that South African apartheid had been overthrown through like the nonviolent protests. Much later, I realized that he spent 20 years of his career blowing up buildings and institutions in South Africa as a way of fighting apartheid. And a lot of people called him a terrorist. And by some definitions, he would have been. I think by most, if you're a moral person, you look at him and go, this man's a freedom fighter. And especially the situation you talked about where, it's violence when nonviolent means have been exhausted.
Right.
And I think to me, and I think the show is exploring this in an interesting way, the word terrorist is thrown around so quickly and so easily by, and I think there is a thing called terrorism, and it's legitimate and it's awful, and it's like definitely a term we should use. But I also think like there's people out there calling like Black Lives Matter activists terrorists, or people who call like anyone doing something that they don't agree with terrorist.
Well, Karli would call it revolutionary.
Yeah.
Right.
It's such a different thing, and it's the who gets to make the decision about who else is a terrorist. And Karli, I think it's such an interesting like character because she's so much on the line, because like what you're saying, Paul, about like snapping your fingers and making all ICE agents disappear. I think for me, I couldn't go there because I definitely am of the belief of like institutions are awful and evil, and I judge people for joining those institutions, but I also still know they're people. And I also know like how many people join something like ICE because they're in a dead-end situation. It's the only way to get a job, you know, or because they've been taught in a way that it's hard for them to see like the evil that ICE is doing. I can't believe I'm on here morally justifying ICE agents. That's not what I need to do.
So what about just like snapping the directors out and be like, if somebody else takes that position, you're going to get it.
Oh, 100%. I mean, like, Superman is allowed to kill Lex Luthor when Lex Luthor's president. You know, like that's a moral line we've already discussed. Any FBI agents listening on the call, this is 100% hypothetical.
Cops literally showed up to my door while we were discussing that.
Such a great, horrible moment.
That was a, yeah.
Oh, yeah, Will, I should tell you, by being on this podcast, you might be on a watch list now. Have fun.
Cool, thanks. Appreciate that.
But yeah, but
I'll just have my white wife open the door all the time now.
There you go. Smart move. But yeah, I think there's just... It's to me, I think it's the thing that... You're right. That some of this felt more contrived. But what they're doing with characters like Karli is, to me, just so interesting. Because I don't know where I stand with her yet. You know, I am... You know, Sam says to her... She says, like, I killed those people to make the world a better place. And he says, it's not a better place if you're killing people. It's just different.
Yeah.
Sam's killed people. Sam killed a whole bunch of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who were Hydra agents to make the world a better place.
Mm-hmm.
And
in episode 1 of this series, he killed a bunch of people.
Right.
Because the military told him to, basically.
Right. Yeah. Like, and maybe that's his own guilt about it and stuff, but I definitely feel like there's a lot of moral self-righteousness here, and some of it's, I think, just not consistent writing, but some of it, I think, is intentional of characters who are very willing to judge others, even though they've never really judged themselves in the same way.
Yeah.
And I will say, to me, that's one thing that I found very... I agree with you that I'm not quite on the super soldiers are by definition supremacist, but I found something very admirable about Zemo in this episode, because I think a lot of times the way heroes get kind of morally compromised is when they start saying, like, well, I can do this thing that I totally disagree with because it'll give me the power to stop it. And I think a lot of villains in Zemo's position would have said, like, I want to end all super soldiers, and the only way to do that is for me to become a super soldier. And the fact that he's like, no, this is my principle. I'll compromise a lot of others, but I won't compromise this. I find that admirable in a way, even if a lot of his stuff I disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think Sam said no so quickly?
Because of his experience with Isaiah. With Isaiah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's completely turned him off from the idea of a super soldier, especially a black super soldier.
Yeah.
I mean, so
we don't know quite, which is annoying to me. Feige, please make the Daredevil MCU. Feige, please make the Netflix MCU 100% canon. But like, whether or not, whether or not Falcon is aware of what happened to Luke Cage, like, you know, so much of Luke Cage's story is about the black man getting the power and getting treated so differently than a white man who would.
Right. Yes.
And I do think that's part of why it is for Sam, as well as also the Isaiah. Like, you know, it's kind of the whole, like, how do we use science that came about through, like, Nazi eugenics or something like that? So yeah. I can definitely see where it's going. But also, it's kind of the Tony Stark thing. Like, Falcon isn't just Lamar punching people. Falcon has... He has a superpower. It's just technology instead of chemistry.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he's a powered person, not physically in his own body, but with his, with his whole getup. Like, you know, I mean, he fought against Thanos and company. Like, you know, I mean, I guess there were people in the Wakandan army who were just like, yeah, we're, you know, but like they had vibranium weapons, right?
Yeah.
Like
Wakandan tech at least kind of sets them apart.
Yeah, exactly. The tech was for sure. You know, it wasn't like just some randos.
So, do you see in the next 2 episodes? Do you see this ending with Karli alive?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think maybe. I think there's a reasonable chance that she could and then become some, like, long-term character.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a reasonable chance that she doesn't, and, like John Walker kills her, and then, like, they arrest John Walker or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't want to see... I don't know. I have a connotation with Flag Smashers to the Flag Smasher from the comics, and he's such a, like, X-list villain that, like,
right.
They've taken his concept, because he's always just tossed aside. They've taken his concept and made it so interesting and could be such a big part of the MCU going forward that if Karli does die, I do not want her cause or what this entire, like, story plot is going towards to die.
Yeah. I think I definitely agree with that.
I think it's so
really,
important.
Like, when Spider-Man Homecoming dealt a little bit with the post-snap stuff, I was glad, but I felt like there was so much more to do.
Far from home.
I really hope this is not, like, the only... Like, that after this, we're like, okay, now everything's back to normal.
Right.
And in terms of Karli possible dying, I there's 3 options that I could see, one of which I would be very unhappy with. The other 2 I think I could be okay with, much more than the other. I think if Karli is just killed by someone else in battle, I will find that very unsatisfying.
Yeah.
I get why it could happen, but I think she's such a good character that she kind of deserves better than that. I think I hadn't even thought of it to this moment, but I love the idea that you're talking about she gets to live on as a character. And the idea that I had is I want her to team up with Sharon Carter in some way. Like, because I don't know exactly where Sharon Carter stands, but I think clearly she's into some stuff that is, I don't quite buy her as actually being the power broker, but I think she can control satellites. Like, she has some fingers in some pies. And I kind of like the idea of her and Karli kind of connecting in some way, because I feel like, you know, they both have, you know, a lot of feelings about the power broker, and they're both kind of, like, on the run, but trying to do their own thing, but okay, being somewhat morally compromised. The other thing that I think could be a very real possibility, which I would not like as much, but I'd be okay if she has to die if it's this way, is I think she could do something where, like, she sacrifices herself to stop Walker or something like that. Where, because I do think that we're starting her down a road of her maybe... She's at the point where I feel like she's fighting hard not to question the things she's doing, but a part of her conscience is getting at her. And so I could see her going in... I don't want it to be a, like, oh, I feel so terrible for those people, I must redeem myself by blowing myself up to do some good. But that there being some kind of an arc of, like, Paul, when you were talking about the whole question about can you do good things through violent means, I think you can, but I think it's hard. But the example that always comes to me is V for Vendetta, where, like, our main character V uses violence to create a situation in which a non-violent revolution can take place.
Right.
And I could see Karli, like, coming to a point where she's like, our group has done what it can, but now we need to end so that we can have, like, non-violence and not just be about one group oppressing another. But yeah, I think any of those, I think it's a great question, Will, and I think any of those are possible.
No, go ahead.
No, continue. I was going to change the subject, so let's keep talking about Karli.
Oh, yeah. Karli's a character that if she were the character that, like, I want her to be, she'd be one of my favorite characters. And I would feel represented in the MCU in a way that I don't. I feel like what I am complaining about this episode and the one before, in terms of feeling like the turns that they're taking with her character it just doesn't feel really organic to me. And I feel like, really, in 2 episodes we're going to get to something resembling a satisfying conclusion to this arc. Like, what would that look like? You know? And the thing is that, like, okay, this could be season 1. I think it's unclear whether all these shows are, like, miniseries or if this is season 1 and there'll be a season 2. But it's not like a regular show that has 1 season, 2 season, 3 season, more, whatever. Because when season 1's over, then there's going to be a bunch of other movies that take place in the same world. Yeah. And I feel like this show is changing that world. It's illuminating that world. And, you know, it's like the fact that it's so much about this global organization, although it feels very small. Like when they were first talking about it, I thought it was this huge group of people, but it's like, oh, it's 8 people and now it's 6 people, but there's like other people with them who aren't super soldiers, a little unclear exactly who they are. Like if it's this global movement, then, you know, it should reverberate throughout like all the other movies. I feel like it probably won't. Mm-hmm. Maybe it will. I don't know. But
the impression I got was that they're kind of like Antifa, in that like there's some people who are kind of officially connected to some degree of leadership, but it's also a lot of just like whoever shows up for the protest, and that other people can like go do their own flag smasher thing. Kind of like maybe a combination of like Antifa and Anonymous.
Yeah, I was going to say Anonymous, too. Yeah. Yeah, and man. Speaking of V for Vendetta. But, like, it feels to me like, I get that. It's just I feel like the picture we've seen of it is too small to really feel that.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of it, the sort of, like, John Walker and Lamar Hoskins, like, going off and trying to do a thing. And, like, what is the rest of the U.S. government or military or anyone else in the world doing about any of this?
Yes.
It like, you know, it feels kind of, like, so small to me, despite the fact that what they're talking about and dealing with is so large. So it's this conflict. I have no idea how that's going to resolve in the last 2 episodes.
Yeah, and the fact that the flag smashers we see now are very different from the covert anonymous type flag smasher that we saw in the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One thing I will say. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I didn't have anything to go.
One thing I will say, and yeah, I mean, we have to judge the show as it is, and this isn't to like excuse things, but I think it might help explain part of why it feels disjointed. Is we don't know the full story, but from what I understand, the original version of the story, the big problem was an illness that was spreading. And that, given the world situation, they decided to change that story fairly dramatically. And part of what that also meant was they are now doing a lot of reshoots during this last year.
Oh, interesting.
During when it may have been a lot harder, to get some of the actors back, but also just to do... I mean, there's 2 elderly actors...
To make a coherent story.
There's 2 elderly actors, the Japanese older man and Isaiah, who are not appearing in the way I would want to. I don't know if that's a factor, but even just more importantly, like the limits on what kind of shoots you could do of like, can you do big scenes in cities versus do you have to do all this like they're all on the run all the time instead of like dealing with the issues in Baltimore and in, you know, New Orleans and stuff. So I do wonder if maybe that's a part of the disjointedness and especially why episodes 1 and 2 feel so different from the others. You know, we still have to judge the show we get, so I don't want to, that's like, doesn't make it all better, but that may help to explain part of what happened.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I think that's very likely. You know, I've never heard the phrase or the word reshoots combined with a product that I didn't have issues with.
Yeah.
Like, every time there's reshoots involved, it's like, it means that something didn't go the way they wanted, or they decided to change something late in the production process, and I feel like what you end up with, maybe it's better than it would have ended up without the reshoots, but it definitely does not have... things just don't end up having a level of coherence to me. And like if shooting during a pandemic, like, should you even be doing it? I don't know. That's a whole separate question. But like, if you're gonna do it, obviously you can't do everything the same way you were doing before. So it's definitely understandable, you know, and like, if they just couldn't get the actors who play Yori and Isaiah, like, on set as much, like, okay, I understand that. It sucks, you know, like, really want more scenes with those guys.
Yeah.
But, like, hoping, like, episode 5, probably 6, you know, it's probably going to be episode 6 and, like, the denouement, like, after the climax, it'll be, like, there'll be, like, a 2-minute scene or something.
I don't want it to be. I really don't
want
it
to be. Me either. Like, I just want to watch that show.
6 is not.
You know,
enough.
that's the...
I mean, I think we are going to get a lot more of Isaiah, and especially his grandson, at least. So, like... But I think you're right. Like the Bucky's friend, I don't know if we're going to see much more of.
Yeah, Yori. Yeah.
Will, you had a different topic you wanted to take us into?
Well, it was more. I've been reminiscing about the first two episodes compared to the third and fourth, and we had mentioned the scale and the story that we're doing in this that it's become is so big. Did you guys watch the Agent Carter seasons?
Yes,
and like each season was only like 6 episodes or 8 episodes or whatever, but those were like one mission, one single little plot line. These are so much bigger. I don't know why they're convinced that they can tell an acceptable story in just 6 episodes. It's mind blowing to me.
I feel like they're trying to do it like it's a long movie, like maybe a Zack Snyder movie, but like in terms of length and in terms of like the episodes going together into being like one coherent thing.
Right.
But you're right. Like the story's just too big. I think the story's just too big. When I heard it was 6 episodes, I was actually really happy about that because I thought, oh, they can tell like a nice kind of tight story.
A buddy cop mission. And that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, there aren't a ton of characters, but the ideas at play, the amount that they're traveling, like, it feels bigger than what we're seeing. I do feel like that's a result of, just having, some constraints of production and also just, number of episodes.
Right. Yeah. I think it's really true.
But yeah, I miss Torres. Like, I feel like...
Yeah, what happened to him?
I feel like Sharon Carter's basically replaced Torres, which is annoying.
Right.
But, because, Torres in the comics becomes the next Falcon. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that's kind of where that was going to go. But then they've just pretty much dropped him after the second episode.
Yeah.
Is he, like, in the hospital or something? Because he got beat up by a super soldier? Is that the explanation? Is there an explanation? Like, no. I feel like there was a one-line throwaway somewhere.
He went and got some intel for Sam, and then that was the last we saw of him. Like, it was a phone call.
Right.
He was a voice on the phone. That was it.
But he did get stomped, right?
He did get destroyed by the Flag Smasher in the first episode, but he still had scenes after that.
But also, he was the liaison between the military and Sam.
Yeah.
And Sam has now gone pretty far away from partnering with the military.
That's true. Yeah. That's true.
So the one last thing I wanted to comment on, and I don't know how much it made people like, yep, that's a great line, totally agree, but I want to see if there's any discussion about it. To me, one of the most searing moments that just like captured so much of what I think is going on in the show that I love is, especially with Sam and his family, is when Karli is talking to Sam's sister, Sarah, which I think it also like that's another place where like I do believe Karli when she says to Sam like I would never actually hurt your family, but the fact she's willing to threaten them is already kind of a like, whew, you're dancing with some darkness there.
Yeah.
But when she's asking her about Captain America and all that, and she's kind of like, you're Captain America, and Sarah says, my world doesn't matter to America, so why should I care about its mascot?
Yeah.
To me, that was such a good line, and like, what did you guys think of that whole interaction?
Well, it's like they were listening to our conversation last week,
right? Yeah. I mean, I thought it was a great line, and I don't have that much to add.
Yeah,
but like, word.
Yeah.
Well, it does bring up. How is she going to feel if and when Sam takes the shield back?
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
If that's how, I mean, because this is how she feels in private, so you're more inclined to think this is how she actually feels. So, if and when Sam becomes the next Captain America, one, you have all this hashtag not my cap, and it's a black not super soldier, but a black Captain America. How is this going to drive an even bigger wedge between the two of them?
Yeah. I think there may be a way in which she sees it very differently, and in that like, I don't think Steve was ever America's mascot. He's not since like 1943. You know, he sort of started out.
Right. Once
I'm not on video, but I tilted my head as soon as you said that.
Yeah.
Right. He was literally America's mascot
right.
at the beginning.
And so to me, I want, and you know, then it gets into like questions of like how much did Sam tell Sarah about what Steve was like. But it's really, to me, part of what I maybe got out of that was like that there's kind of a line of lineage of like Steve to Sam, where Captain America has become kind of its own thing. But that very clearly, when they said this is America's hero again, they're with John Walker, they're bringing Cap back as like, this is the mascot of America. Yeah. And her line is very clear. It's like, it's the mascot of white America. You know, it's the mascot of an America that's never cared about me and my family and my world.
He's a walking USO show now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Which is what made me kind of surprised that he's actually involved in all this so much.
Right?
Like, doesn't he have like appearances?
Well, no, he works for/with the GRC. I mean, that's what we're led to believe from last episode. They do the GRC commercial, and the very next scene is the GRC vehicle, and Cap is the first one out.
Right. I feel like that's what's missing, is actually knowing at all what's going on with the GRC. Mm-hmm. Like, they're repatriating people, which I think means they're actually kicking them out of countries that they now live in.
I think it's a polite word for
deported. Might have lived in for the last 5 years. Yeah, exactly. So they are ICE, basically. They're like an international, you know, oh no, you go here, like, and they have something to do with like resources being reapportioned or whatever. Like, that sounds like a really large group. I feel like what I'm missing from it is seeing them do any of that. You know, seeing the organization do what they're saying they're doing or what Karli's saying they're doing. Yeah. Right? Like, we don't see any of that. And, like, I really want to see it because then I can actually have an opinion. Like, I mean, I have an opinion. Then I can have a more informed opinion, you know? And... yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's very true. It would be great to get more of their story.
I mean, like, I'm sure I'm against what they're doing.
Yeah.
But, like I want to see it, you know? Yeah. I want to see them take some family and be like, no, you don't get to live here anymore. We're moving you there.
Right.
Or, like, be like, oh, yeah, we're going to feed these people because whatever, you know? Like show me both sides of what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, give me a face to think about getting blown up or not.
Punch, yeah.
Can I complain for 1 second?
Go for it.
How the hell did Karli get her number and know where she lives and the name of her case?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're supposed to think that Karli is super connected, and
there's.
Well, I mean, Karli was at one point close enough to the power broker that she could steal the serums.
Sure.
And we still don't know who the power broker is, but we've heard the idea in a bunch of places that Karli might be the power broker's daughter. Right. You know, or some other close connection. So I guess I took it as, you know, Sharon Carter can also order satellites to focus on the things she wants them to focus on. So I feel like there's a lot of people who have powers that are not being explained.
I guess.
That felt very Amanda Waller to me.
Yeah.
Like, I know all your secrets. But, yeah, like, I would like them to show us that a little bit more. Like, up until this point, it doesn't feel like she has necessarily those kinds of resources.
Right. But it does, like, the Flag Smasher that you see in the first episode definitely seems like that. You know, where they've got hidden geotags. And, like, a dark web, forum to go and coordinate these things across the globe. I get that, and if there was more of that, then sure. But even if it's just like 10 seconds of a guy at a computer being like, "Here you go,"
mm-hmm.
Just give me something. I don't know. It felt unearned.
Yeah, that's fair. That's definitely fair. We're almost at the 1 minute, 90-minute mark. Paul, I think we still have about 14 more of your bullet points, though, or have we covered most of them?
No, I've deleted almost all of them. The one I have left is about the myth of overpopulation, but I think we could deal with that in a future episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like maybe if there's one that's a little lighter on the, I don't know, murder.
Yeah, and I think you were not on the episode. Were you on the episode we did about Endgame?
No.
Or was that a Jacob episode?
I was not, but I have a lot to say about Infinity War and Endgame that I haven't really said that much.
I guess it was more on Infinity War, but yeah, we definitely did a whole thing on the problems of that overpopulation is a myth, and Malthus was proved wrong 300 years ago or 200 years ago.
Yeah, and that like having it be a central plot point in your whole universe is like actually I think highly problematic and reinforces that view. You know, I mean, it's not how many people there are, it's how resources are utilized, and there's so much to say about it. Go check out that episode for people who are interested. I wasn't on it, so you won't have to hear me complain about how I actually hated Infinity War. It's like the only Marvel movie that I hated. But although it has, again, like this episode, it has some just brilliant moments.
Yeah.
Which is what makes it frustrating for me.
I will remind you that you live in a world in which Thor 2 exists in terms of Marvel movies you hated, but that's fair.
Yeah, that's got Darcy in it.
That's fair. That's fair.
I don't hate Thor 2. I don't think it's a great movie.
Yeah.
Oh,
but
man.
like,
Thor.
It's not based on a premise that I'm just like,
it's so bad.
What are you doing?
I was so, like, Thor was the one excuse to have a mainly all-white cast. Like, these are Norse gods. And you feel like you have to have a black god, and you made him the bouncer of Asgard.
Oh.
Just
the bouncer of Asgard.
Wait, you're assuming you're talking about Heimdall?
Heimdall.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and like, I have long said that I felt like the MCU is generally very good at casting, but the most criminal underuse of an amazing acting talent is what they did with Idris Elba.
That's
like,
true, but like
what you're talking about the race thing, but also just he's such a good actor, and
he's an
never
amazing
got to
actor.
do anything.
Yeah,
he's an amazing actor, but like you did not have to make a multiracial a multiracial race of gods from Norway. Like Hogan didn't need to have a strong Asian accent, didn't need to be Asian at all. They didn't need to make the bouncer black. If you wanted an international cast, then you could do Selvig and Darcy as your minorities, and that would be fine because they don't exist until the success of the MCU, and now they're in the comics. But
yeah, in terms of, especially like if you're gonna go for multiracial, making the black guy the bouncer is maybe not the best look. I can understand that.
Oh man, and this I'm speaking as having been a bouncer myself. But man, but I also agree that they horribly underused Idris Elba. I feel so bad for him.
Yeah,
I can't wait to see Stallone as Starhawk, though.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the Suicide Squad.
Stallone as Starhawk in Guardians.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's true. One last thing I just wanted to quickly drop, and then I think we can wrap up. I like how much they specifically name drop Nazis in this as like the epitome of like the problems that things can become, you know. And like, there's a couple points where they're talking about like Nazis and how bad that is, and then Karli specifically calls John Walker when they're fighting, like she calls him a Nazi, which I just really like that because I feel like that's not. I mean, obviously Cap fought Nazis back in the day, and I think for a lot of us, like, Nazis can always be like you want a quick go to like who's the most evil Nazis, but like in our own world when like neo-Nazism is kind of back on the rise again, and there's all questions about like Karli seems to believe that you punch Nazis, and so I just kind of like the show kind of taking a clear like naming that specifically.
Yeah, and maybe sometimes blow them up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, I still feel so bad for you. She started killing just wantonly.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, what are you doing? It actually reminds me of season 3 of The Legend of Korra, where they have this character Zahir, who's an anarchist, and and I just love him as a character. He's voiced by Henry Rollins.
Yeah.
And then like they just like keep going down a certain, and I'm like,
and they just
we have an episode on that.
People's air from their lungs.
Yeah.
God, that was so.
Oh no, that was
baller.
That was great.
Yeah.
I want to make a Twitch that's or a TikTok that's that scene with the song "You Take My Breath Away."
Oh, okay.
And on that note, I think we will start to wrap up. Paul, if people want to find your TikToks or your thoughts on other places, how can they do that?
At Zen Madman. I do have a TikTok now. I haven't posted anything yet, but if I do, it'll be that one.
I like it. And Will, we talked about hype as a superpower. You want to say a word or two about that podcast and where people can find you?
Yeah, Hype is my superpower. It's a weekly podcast where my best buddy and I, Steve, talk about the comics we read over the last week. You can find it pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts. We also have a Facebook group where you can post questions for us to answer, and we have an Instagram page that is not very active because I'm very behind.
That's very fair. Well, great. Thank you both so much for being on here. Definitely check out, to our fans, definitely check out Hype is My Superpower. Definitely check out Paul's stuff at Zen Madman. There's some great videos. These put up on, you have the videos on YouTube, right? The chess tutorials and stuff?
Yeah, just go to Twitter or something, and I post things about what I post.
Sounds good, yeah.
And eventually my website will like be a thing.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Definitely check out the content by both of these folks. Thank you both so much for being a part of this. And to our fans, let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you more. You can find us on Facebook or Twitter under The Ethical Panda. You can also email me at theethicalpanda@gmail.com. And you can find everything there by just going to theethicalpanda.com, my website for all the podcasts. Along with this podcast, I also do a podcast on the Star Wars universe, where we just did an episode on The Last Jedi, going deep into that movie and talking all sorts of thoughts about that. And all the podcasts I do are part of the Stranded Panda Podcast Network. There you can find the podcasts that I do. You can also find great podcasts on the MCU. So they're also doing great reviews of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. You can find great stuff on Star Trek, on the DC universe, on their Bingers Assemble podcast. They just did a whole thing on the Monsterverse, the Kong and Godzilla movies. I don't really agree with some of their takes, but they're great and very entertaining. I've learned that I am not a fan of kaiju movies. I am a fan of movies that have kaiju and also great plot and characterization. And I've been told that we don't need those for a good kaiju movie.
Those don't exist.
Yeah, that's legit. That's the thing. They did exist in Kong Skull Island, and they did exist in Pacific Rim. So now I want them always. But,
okay.
Fair enough. That's another story for another time. But one definite thing I want you to check out on the Stranded Panda Podcast Network is there's now a new podcast that's gotten started by two of our members specifically on animation. It's called The Animation Deliberation. They've been doing some great things on Young Justice. And pretty soon, we'll be doing a podcast in combination with them, Star Wars universe, as well as them, on The Bad Batch, the new animated Star Wars show that's coming to Disney Plus in May. So check all those out. Definitely check out the content of Paul and Will. And please let us know what you think. We'd love to hear you in the discussion. Thank you so much, and have a great day.